Welcome to Healing Vibes with Aeriol, healing body, mind, and soul. Hello, everyone. Thanks for dropping in. You have reached Healing Body, Mind, and Soul, and I'm your host, Aeriol Ascher. Now, today we're going to get right into it, everybody. We're going to talk about all the icky, uncomfortable things, and it's going to really set you free, I promise. Today's fantastic guest, Cheryl Jones of Good Grief Radio. I love that, Cheryl, by the way. It's so fantastic. Good Grief Radio is here to really help us at a time when it's so important to navigate through the tough stuff that is coming up. Cheryl, thank you so much for taking some time out to come be with us today.
Oh, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. Let's just dig right into it. We're talking about grief. Cheryl is a grief counselor, and as a somatic body worker and energy healer, I mean, it lives in your body until you tone it, sing it, squirm it, whatever you want to do to release it, but it's going to stay there until we do something about it. Just tell us, Cheryl, why is this happening?
Why is grief
Why?
happening?
Why is grief? Well, every individual trigger is something, but tell us why
Absolutely.
you're doing this important work.
Sure. I'll go back to kind of the beginning of the story, or there's never a beginning, is there? You can always go
Mm,
further back. But
mm,
the most momentous experience in my life that led me to be a grief counselor
mm.
was that my first wife had a lethal form of cancer that was expected to kill her in 6 months to a year, and she lived from diagnosis to death, she lived to 8.5 years. She'd been sick for 10. So that period in my life, people thought I was being dramatic at the time, but I would say I became a different person. I was completely transformed. And your listeners probably wouldn't be surprised by the painful parts. You know, uh, it was really hard to deal with her disability. I spent years being in fear of her death. Got over that over the over the 10 years. But what really radically surprised me was the ways in which I changed positively during that time. The ways in which my personality transformed, my way of viewing the world, my sense of the spiritual and things larger than myself, all of that just changed radically. And the example I like to use is that I developed a sense of humor. I hadn't had one before. Now, isn't that
What?
counterintuitive? Um, but now it makes total sense to me because when you face up to what's difficult in life, um, the irony of the human condition becomes really evident.
Mm.
And our gallows humor was the bomb. You know, people would come expecting to be, you know,
Totally
suffering through the
depresso,
visit.
yeah.
Yeah. And by the end, they were laughing hysterically and they'd be like, how are we having fun right now? But for us, at some point, the fear of everything, all that fear, all that inability to be with hard feelings just was gone. We'd
Mm.
faced every hard feeling, and what was left was the capacity for a bigger joy.
Oh, I
Because
love that.
from my view, all emotions kind of live in the same place, and if you're compressing one, you're compressing all of them.
Mm.
And so to me, the degree to which we can feel pain or suffering relates very much to how much joy we might experience.
Mm.
So it was really a liberation that time. And that was a shock to me. And she died 25 years ago this
Mm.
year. And that has never lost its power for me. That's why I do the radio show. That's why I do a lot of things I do, to really focus on the message that yes, grief hurts. It really hurts a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Loss hurts a lot. Challenge hurts a lot. And if we choose to engage with it, um, transformation can sometimes come out of it. Actually, more often than post-traumatic stress comes
Mm.
out of it. Post-traumatic growth comes out of it, which is a whole subject in itself. Uh,
Post-traumatic growth. I love that. There we
that's an
go.
actual field of study, Ariel.
Okay, I
Yeah,
did not know this.
the
And
University of
how is
North
that different
Carolina.
than transformation? How is it, how does it differ?
Well, it's very much related, but
Mm.
what the people who coined that expression,
Mm-hmm.
they're at the University of North Carolina,
Mm.
and they were noticing that sometimes in trauma, people actually later would say that they grew as a result, and they started studying it. And so, what they're interested in is how do we transform?
Mm.
I realized we did before I ever found that field of study because it happened to me. But
Mm.
what they did was study, okay, when people say they grew after a trauma, what are they referring to? What changed in them? And it was really 5 areas: uh, better relationship, improved
Wow.
relationship, um, a sense of more possibilities, um, a spiritual change, deepening or uh, you know, actually
Mm.
a new
A
way of
new
looking at
direction.
spirituality. Um, there's two more. Um, a sense of your own personal strength,
Mm.
your own personal capacities, and I always forget one. It's never the same one.
And that
there's
one.
there's one more. Um, oh, awareness of the beauty of life.
Mm.
So for me, when I a client actually came in and who was suffering a lot and said, "Hey, I just found this thing, post-traumatic growth." I heard that expression and I went, "That's what I'm working with every day." I just knew it. And then I went and looked it up and you know, that resonates so much. I would say all those areas changed for me in that
Mm.
10 years that my wife was sick.
Mm.
And
Mm.
every guest I've ever had has, to one degree or another, experienced that because my show is about transformation after loss.
Mm.
And if someone identifies themselves as a transformer after loss, they know exactly what we're talking about in that area.
I just want to share a little bit of my own story for just a moment here. So in the last couple of years, I had a little pack of dogs, right? But they were all around the same age. So a couple of years ago, they all started, and a cat too. So this year I lost the cat I have a new population of dogs. I've repopulated, but I lost my cat here in 2021, and that was really, I was like, oh man, and I
What
had
a
some
hard year for that to happen.
surgery, yeah, and I had a surgery, and then my little dog had a ruptured disc and lost the use of her limbs. So for the last couple of weeks, I've been doing doggy therapy, and I was just thinking of you, being a caretaker for 10 years, that fear. And I'm thinking just in my own little micro way, in my, doing my little doggy physical therapy, I'm a body worker and energy worker. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got given a task, right? I got like, okay, I really got
Well,
to do this. I have been, this is an integrity thing. This little dog is going to walk. And I'm going to tell you what, she has. And I was so offended. My mom made the worst joke. I just want to say this because it's so bad. You said gallows humor, and I wanted to share the gallows humor. My mom said, "Oh, we can, we'll rent her out as third third base, and I'm like, Mom, like terrible, my dog. But this little creature, she can move, man. I don't know. She is reframed for me possibility, and I thought I was a willful creature, but this little creature is willful. Anyway, I digress, Cheryl.
No,
But
not
I just wanted
entirely though,
to.
because just to add to your sense of those 10 years,
Mm,
there were already children. And
mm,
then uh, my wife said, we had gotten together after the child. She said, I want to have a baby with you. And I was like,
mm.
yeah, that's what I want. A teenager, a dying partner, and a baby. Sounds great, right?
Sign me
That
up.
is not
It's
a
a challenge,
plan.
right? It's like, yes,
But
I am just the person to
and
handle this assignment.
she was some would say stubborn, some would say enduring. But she did
I
not
like her
drop it.
style. I like her
she,
style. Yeah.
she did not drop it. She just kept bringing it up periodically. And then finally, several years in, she said, if we'd had a baby when I first mentioned it, we would now have a preschooler.
Oh
and,
my gosh.
and something about that clicked. It was like, because we'd had in the meantime, many friends died who weren't sick when she was, and I was like, okay, what life do we want? And I'll just have to trust that what we need to have the life will be supplied, will be given, or we'll find it, or we'll have bad days. And so we actually, 2.5 years before she died, adopted a baby.
Oh my gosh.
So, and all our friends were like, it's a magical story how she came into our lives. But the point that our friends would make is this doesn't happen to people, and then they'd say, oh, yeah, it happens to Joanne and Cheryl, they're like a different. But I think what they were
Oh.
referring to was that at some point in that whole process, we were very much fully alive.
Mm,
We were very present. The future was going to happen. Meantime, what life did we want to be living in the in between now and then? And what ended up being quite remarkable about that is I had, of course, pain in grief and missed her, but I had absolutely zero regret.
mm.
And
That's
for me,
powerful.
the thing that gets people stuck in grief is often
Mm,
remorse, things they wish they'd done differently. I didn't have any of that, except for the fact we did have a period where we weren't partners. We met young, then we were friends, then we were partners again. I had a moment, but I didn't have it after she died. I had it when we got back together, right?
mm,
Oh, I missed
mhm.
all that time. But by the time she died, I had not one regret. And I feel that helps with grief a lot.
Mm. Living fully. I
Live
love that,
fully.
Cheryl. I love
And
that.
also to not blame other people. And she had a lot of bad medical experiences, some of which involved racism. She was a Black woman.
Oh my gosh.
But we couldn't get caught up forever. We'd get mad, we'd do anything we needed to do about it, and then we'd keep going, because that's another thing that really complicates a grief experience is blaming someone and not being able to go forward from that. If only this person hadn't done, and it's really the same thing. It's
Right.
just
And
directed at
there's no,
yourself or
I mean,
someone else.
spinning out on the blame game. Hey, guilty. Don't worry. During my whole dog crisis of my dog emergency spinal surgery, trust me, I had a couple moments where things were lit up in places, but really it's about the health and well-being of in your case your partner, not the lack of
Well,
poise was.
I feel it's about being awake to the whole experience so that you can address what it's bringing up.
Mm.
So I'm not saying don't get mad when people do things that make you mad, but
Mm.
I'm saying, how does that anger inform what you do next? I'd
Mm.
say a really good example of that, and I don't want to necessarily get political, but it's hard to help it these days. You know,
It's a
uh,
safe
when,
space for anything. Let her rip.
well, for instance, something happens like everyone's watching the video of George Floyd being murdered.
Mm.
Um, there's no question that made me mad. But what did that then tell me to do? That was different for every single person, but many people were called to do things by that, right? And if that hadn't gotten your attention, then how do you know what to do next? You just sort of collect a bunch of icky feelings.
Mm.
Um, so I did a video about it. I talked about it a little bit on my show because that's a global grief event. The pandemic, another example. That was a global grief event. Everyone experienced loss. But did they then learn from it or just suffer until it changed? And the people I think who are just suffered until it changes are more likely to want to get back to a normal that doesn't exist anymore. Uh, you know,
Right.
they're kind of on hold, and then when they can go out again, it'll be like it was, but it won't be.
Yeah.
But the people I know who have actually taken the opportunity to change some things, um, I think that they're hoping to come into a world that's just a little bit better for them.
Amen. I like that, Cheryl. I like that a lot. I don't think that we've talked about it. I think we talked before we started the recording of the show today. But in San Jose, there was a mass shooting. And
Yes.
that's San Jose is not notorious for these kinds of things. And
No,
we had one close by in Gilroy just a couple years ago.
absolutely.
Actually, I was booked to be on the stage singing that day and had to cancel and
Mm,
didn't make it. And that was the first year in a long time that I had not been to perform at the Gilroy Garlic Festival. That was something I enjoyed doing. I don't know if I'll ever go back to, well, not to that venue. I'm not with that configuration anymore. I don't like, geez, let's hope lightning doesn't strike twice. But these shootings, all these things, I mean, you see them in the news, they're cropping up all over the place because people aren't dealing with their grief, their anger, their fear, their whatever it is, betrayal, whatever negativity it is. What do you have to say to anybody who's suffering? What do you have to
it's
say? Like
it's
if you're
such a
sitting,
big it's such a big conversation from my view because
mm,
the people who are raised to believe that everything should go right for them, uh,
mm,
we could talk about it in terms of privilege, and then everything doesn't go right, and then they're unhappy, and that shows itself in the world, and then maybe they get bullied, maybe everyone avoids them.
mm,
um, there's no way we as a culture have of addressing pain that isn't individual. And then add the gun culture,
mm,
um, add the idea, um, if I'm suffering, I should make you suffer. There's so many factors in that, but I
yeah, it's
feel
very,
that that's an outgrowth of a tremendous amount of pain and loss and suffering that people come to believe shouldn't exist, and it's somebody's fault. Back to this idea of fault, and then they kill a bunch of people.
mm, it's so sad.
It's so sad. And I noticed when the San Jose thing happened, I was getting confused by the numbers. They'd say 8 people died, then they'd say 9 people died, and then they'd say 8. And for the first day or two, it was very, very confusing. And then I realized, oh, some stories are including the shooter, and some stories are not.
Oh, yes, I think
Uh,
that's
uh,
it.
but he did in fact die.
Hmm.
And
I think by his own
yes, he killed
doing.
himself for sure. But it's all one big event, and it's really hard to have compassion for someone who does something like that. And I have to be far enough away to feel it, to feel compassion.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think the last several years have really challenged that. That compassion's easy for people that we like. It's really hard for
Right.
people that we don't.
Right, right. I'm in a group where we focus on this exact thing about hate, and our leader, Dr. Beth Halbert, we really take a look at, okay, where is your dark. I was just thinking while you were talking, of a moment where I realized my own privilege, where I was like in a little mental bind with myself, and how my own inner spoiled child was not getting her way, or whatever it is. Everybody's,
Exactly.
and these can be little tiny things. Of course, these are
Of course.
little tiny things. This is such a juicy conversation, Cheryl. I really enjoy covering this terrain with you, because I feel like there's such stigma around mental health, that people don't want to get help for grief, or they don't want to. That it's
And
not in vogue to admit that you need help with something.
there's that, and there's also even I've had the experience several times because I'm also a grief counselor. I work
Mm.
individually with
Mhm.
people and with families and couples on grief issues, and I've had several clients over the years come to me because the therapist they'd been with for a long time could not handle it when they had a death in their lives. So mental health counselors are not always good at grief.
Wow.
Um,
I love this
I'm not saying
distinction.
all, but
Thank you for that distinction. Yeah, no,
it's
thanks.
yeah, it's not because mental health counselors are primarily wanting to help people strategize better to live their lives better, and that has to do with acknowledging and changing the way your brain talks about things, and taking
Self-awareness kind of
care of
stuff.
yourself, self-awareness, insight. But grief to me is a kind of upside down world where all of the stuff, all the painful stuff in your brain actually needs to be there for a while. You can't get around, you have to get through. And
Mm,
so it actually isn't that helpful. It's helpful to become less critical about what goes on in your mind around grief, but it has to be acknowledged, and it has to be sat with for periods of time. For most people, it's my phrase I like to use a lot is resistance is futile.
yeah,
you know,
got
it's
it.
about accepting I'm going to really struggle. I'm going to be in pain. Even people who have done a lot of therapy and really made a lot of progress, that doesn't mean that they can just skip ahead to the transformation part. It doesn't
Mm,
work that way with grief. We have to feel it. And I'll bet you know that to a degree from losing your pets.
mm,
You have to
mm.
feel like crap for a while, don't you?
Yeah,
Um,
luckily I have the energy tools, and I let myself feel. But
well, that's the ticket, though. That's
even in this conversation, I feel heaviness, around the current events that we're talking about. Everybody's
right.
got their stuff, and I'm super energetically sensitive. So even talking about all this, I'm like, there's more stuff to process.
Yeah.
It's there.
A lot of people have said, because I've worked more in this pandemic time, as many
I bet.
counselors have, and people will say things like, "Oh, how are you handling all this?" And I'll say, "Well, I'm remembering what it was like when my wife died, and I could just uh, I was dedicated to let the feelings come in, have them, and let them go. That kind of flow.
Mm-hmm.
But that involves a lack of resistance, you know. Yes, I cried every day, but I wasn't bothered by that.
Mm,
That was part of. I honestly felt it was kind of an honor to cry over her. You
mm,
know, we loved each other a lot, and she died.
mm,
That's worth your tears.
mm,
That's worth a heaviness in your chest. That's worth all the things I was experiencing. So I didn't resist any of it. Neither did I hold on to it, because grief is not depression. There are happy moments in grief for many people, especially after a few months.
mm,
Uh, it's not a dulling of everything. It's a very emotional state where you're feeling lots of things all the
mm,
time, sometimes two things at once. So I think that we haven't really been taught how to allow our feelings and how to let them come in, be there, and
mm.
leave.
You know, I had a close personal friend die. Um, Ex relationship kind of thing, but we had this soul brother kind of thing, you know, those kind of things. But he died in December, and I remember when he died, you know, that's still very recently. When he died, it was surprising because I was just packing my stuff. I was supposed to go out and spend some time with him. But when he died, it brought up also the death of some other family members from the past that I had not even realized I still had a lot of grief. And it was surprising to me. Yeah, the tears were surprising to me. And I help people with that kind of thing. I help people with that kind of thing. But I just remember how much I didn't think that my body was going to have any more. It wasn't the kind of tears where I was struggling or anything, but just flowing. Luckily, I think that a couple years ago it could have been a lot worse. Yeah, we
Well,
strive
and
to get
you
better.
you're bringing up a really really important point, which is
Mm,
that I feel there's this if grief is talked about at all in our world,
mm.
it's seen to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But
Oh,
actually, it doesn't. It doesn't have a beginning. Well, it has an instigator, but you
sure.
know, for instance, with my wife, her death wasn't the beginning. Our whole relationship was the beginning, right?
Mhm.
And that experience of having grief come up for other people you've lost, it doesn't mean your grief is unfinished. I don't believe that. I believe that grief lives in one place. And
Ah, I see,
and
I see.
when a new thing, it gives you a chance to do more with it, sure,
I
but
see.
it will never go away. You know,
I
for
see.
instance, what I mostly live in, I'm remarried, I'm very happy, my life is good. And what I mostly experience about my first wife and my relationship is gratitude. But if I walk behind someone on the street that walks the way she walked or looks just the way that she looked,
Mm,
um, I'm back there. And it doesn't change. That experience doesn't change. It just comes less often and lasts less long. And
mm,
that's just the nature of our relationship now. That occasionally I miss her body. I have
mm.
a relationship with her that's completely on another plane, you know.
Amen. That's
And I had to make that transition, right? But sometimes, I mean, she had a very powerful earthly presence. I miss that. And
mm,
that's fine with me. I don't mind. So I don't, I'm about to do some clubhouse meets about loss over the long term, because I don't think there's enough talk about how we incorporate losses over time. Look at my life. I mean, it's built around, we wouldn't be talking if I hadn't had that
mm.
loss. 25 years later, it's still a very important experience in my life. It informs all my work. But that's not a bad thing to me.
I don't think that's a bad thing at all, Cheryl. I think you're up to wonderful stuff. You don't seem like a depressed person. You seem like a very gregarious person to me. Actually, your energy is nice and light, and I love that you mentioned the humor thing earlier.
Listen to
I can
this now.
feel that.
I can up the ante on that. I was the shyest person you would ever want to meet before that experience. I was
Mm.
the type of person who arrived at a party 15 minutes before it started to not refuse to come, and insult the host. And as soon as people started arriving, I left. That's how shy I was. And that just completely changed in the course of her
Wow.
illness. She wasn't like that at all, so I had to surrender. But also I stopped being that way over time.
Awesome.
It's
Awesome.
it's a luxury I couldn't afford being that shy. So it still cracks me up when someone calls me gregarious because of that
I love
early
that. No, I
experience.
like your energy. It's great. It's fantastic. I really appreciate that. Cheryl, if we have any listeners who are experiencing grief or grief is up for them after past grief is up for them after hearing today's conversation, and they'd love to reach out to you. We already told them Good Grief Radio. I love that.
Yeah,
Tell them
Good
how they
Grief,
can get
come on
hold of you.
Voice America. That'll get people to the show, and every link is on there. But my website is www.weatheringgrief, two words, but all run together.com.
Mm,
Weathering grief,
weathering,
like weathering a storm.
weathering
And I'm on
grief.
all the social media platforms, but it's best to get there because they're all a little bit differently named. It's best to get there from the radio page or from my website.
Fantastic. What a great service you are to everybody. Okay, so real quick before I go, what is the one super tip that you can leave our listeners with? Anything that comes to the top of your mind?
Yeah, I was just talking about this earlier. There's a man named Francis Weller. He wrote The Wild Edge of Sorrow. A great,
Mm,
great guy, great book. And he says something that I've come to rely on a lot, which is in grief, we have to balance grief with gratitude. Too much of the grief feelings, and we become rigid and bitter. Too heavy on the gratitude end, we become unreal. So that's
mm.
one thing I'd say. The other is my four bywords are feel the feelings, find places of solace and comfort, find inspiration, and take action.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for being here. This has been
My
Cheryl
pleasure.
Jones of Good Grief Radio. She's a grief counselor and the host of Good Grief Radio on Voice America. Okay, everybody, that wraps up our time. You're going to want to tune in next week. And until then, this has been Aeriol, your host. Happy healing.